think you're confusing peace with quiet.
Yeah, what's the vibranium for?
I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to take this time to explain my evil plan.
This is my review of Avengers Age of Ultron. And to make this review more interesting, I'll start by saying I give Age of Ultron 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's flawless and still not my favorite movie. Yet. Avengers Age of Ultron has a running joke, a fantastic villain, and a stellar opening. Plus multiple scenes that show character interaction and chemistry and intrigue. And it manages to do all of this by balancing the action and subplots with what could be the biggest roster of superheroes and non-superheroes we have seen in a big-budget superhero film yet. The reason I bring this up is because balancing so many characters and so much action with story and intimacy is something movies like Watchmen and the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels simply could not do. We'll see if that changes when Zack Snyder's Batman vs. Superman comes out, which will be in, I think, about a year and a half. When Joss Whedon accepted the job of making the Avengers Age of Ultron, the sequel to his mega-hit superhero flick, Marvel's The Avengers, he was positively intimidated by the sheer scope of the amount of action and timing he'd have to deal with. His reaction might have been something like someone attaching lead weights to his ankles and then expecting him to run a 5K. But then again, what do I know? When I first saw The Avengers, I was as disappointed as I was pleased by what I saw. The opening felt unnecessarily cliché. There was too much of Nick Fury, who already felt overused once the movie started. That's not the same reaction I got from watching Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Loki didn't convince me as a believable villain. The music simply did not sell the movie. And why was it so few characters had so many good lines and yet so little screen time? Many will argue that the first Avengers movie was made simply to introduce us to the idea that superheroes can in fact share a movie, and it pulled it off quite well. The Avengers Age of Ultron is a different experience. This time, Whedon wasn't just throwing characters we already knew from previous movies into a brand new one. He was also having to introduce us to new characters, new to Marvel's cinematic universe, I mean. Granted, we did see Quicksilver a little bit in X-Men Days of Future Past, and with what little screen time he had, he certainly did shine. We got to see Elizabeth Olsen as the Scarlet Witch. We also get to see Ultron, who's voiced by James Spader, a very formidable villain to the Avengers. We get to see Paul Bettany as the villain, and we get to see yet another actor surprisingly play yet another potential villain in this movie, although he'd make more of a bit part. And I won't say who, so as to not spoil it for everyone. And on top of all of this, we get to see Hawkeye's private life, his family. Who knew? Now we do. Even bit parts get better scenes in this movie than they did in the first Avengers. And guess who got to actually have a cameo in this movie? As if he hasn't had a cameo in every Marvel movie before or since. Not to mention, in the superheroes who played partners to the main superheroes from previous movies also get to have their moments. War Machine, the Falcon. Anthony Mackie is great as the Falcon. I don't care what anyone says. He's great. And also, Don Cheadle does play a very convincing War Machine. This movie has become quite crowded, and everyone is here not just for all the fun and hard work and sweat and blood and tears and metal and capes and costumes, but to remind us that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is far from over. Wait, what? Oddly enough, by doing this, Whedon gave himself more room, I feel, to make all the characters he had at his disposal truly shine and make them more interesting and actually show us why we care about these characters at all. It's not because they have superpowers. It's because of what their powers do and do not allow them to do. Actually have a life. There are some scenes in this movie that made me feel like I was watching both a Marvel movie and a Joss Whedon film. For example, the party scene right before we are introduced to the physical Ultron felt like I was watching an episode of Firefly. I also like the scenes that showed the virtual Ultron and the virtual Jarvis, virtually hacking into one another and destroying one another. It was like watching a scene out of an anime. Ghost in the Shell. To add to all of this, we actually had to include scenes showing how Captain America, aka Steve Rogers, and Iron Man, aka Tony Stark, are able to get along less and less, eventually fighting amongst themselves, and if they continue, they could lead to all-out war. Foreshadowing, perhaps? At the very beginning of the movie, Stark happens to smash accidentally into the fortress that they are trying to break into at the very beginning of the movie, as I said, and he lets out a swear word. Shit, he says. Captain America calls him on this by saying, language. Stark doesn't respond to that very well. So, he convinces other characters, i.e. another Avenger and even a couple members of S.H.I.E.L.D., to do unto Captain America what he did to Iron Man. When I say it's a running joke, I mean it's a running joke. It comes up multiple times throughout the whole movie, from beginning to end. But not very often, thankfully, and there's a good reason for that. And if that wasn't enough, there is a subtle reference to a Studio Ghibli film, Castle in the Sky, one of my favorites. Something we're going to be seeing more and more of in movies distributed by Disney are references to Studio Ghibli and Pixar films. Avengers, Age of Ultron, just works. Perhaps what worried me the most was not what had to be done with the script. A novel could cover more ground than any movie because it is in fact a novel. But what had to be done during production and post-production. The visual effects acquired by this movie make even the Sith look like child's play. Some scenes have so much going on that sometimes you just have to make yourself sit back and watch. Now granted, the visual effects at the beginning of the movie were not quite as polished as we were probably used to in this day of insane visuals. But there's a good reason for that. Because as the movie continues on, there's so much required by all the metal action happening. The producers in Whedon probably felt they needed to give that much room for all the metal action. So why not step back from the budget on special effects from the beginning and have the rest of the movie have it? What this movie does real well is allow us to enjoy it, even with so much going on, and if you can believe it, there's actually going to be more stuff happening. This movie is better than the first. Thank you very much for your time and have an awesome day.